You're listening to KZUM News on 89.3 KZUM Lincoln and KZUM HD. Good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of KZUM News, an hour dedicated to learning more about what is going on in Lincoln and the surrounding areas. I am the news director and your host, Amantha Dickman. Mayor Larian Gaylor Baird and city officials announced the completed construction of the Lincoln on the Move 17th Street Corridor Improvement Project on Thursday, June 26th. Improvements to 17th Street between A and S Streets include a mill and overlay of the existing surface and base repairs where required, joint and crack sealing, public utility adjustment, pavement markings to include a buffered bike lane, and inlet top replacements. Additional updates provided by other funding sources were made to upgrade the existing curb ramps to comply with the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act's requirements. Mayor Gaylor Baird met with city officials at the corner of 17th and M Streets the morning of Thursday, June 26th, to highlight the project's impact.
Thanks for joining us here on location at 17th and M Streets, downtown Lincoln. Joining me this morning is Councilman Brody Weber, Near South Neighborhood Association Secretary Kathy Wilkin, and our Assistant Director of Transportation, Thomas Schaefer. Investing in streets across our city and within our neighborhoods is one of our community's and my administration's top priorities. And we do this work because we know that well-maintained streets support economic development, they promote and enhance our safety, and they support our high quality of life here in Lincoln. And this spring, our community reaffirmed this priority when they voted decisively in favor of our Lincoln on the Move initiative. And this has allowed the City of Lincoln to further invest in our streets at record levels. Since its inception in 2019, Lincoln on the Move has added $102 million to our city's overall street budget through the first 6 years of the program, resulting in more than 220 lane miles of new and resurfaced streets. Lincoln on the Move is making it easier, safer, and smoother for our community members to drive to work, for our children to travel to school, for customers to support our local businesses. This morning, I'm so excited to be joined here to announce that this Lincoln on the Move project has been completed right here on 17th Street. Thanks to our community's investment in Lincoln on the Move, we are so proud that improvements like this project are able to efficiently connect residents to downtown shops and businesses, to help students traveling up to the University of Nebraska Lincoln campus, and enhance mobility not only for drivers, but for cyclists and pedestrians. And that's actually just the improvement and value that you see above ground. To maximize efficiency and to minimize disruptions for our community members, our city team also completed a major water main replacement as we made surface improvements to 17th Street. That brings the city's combined investment in this project to just over $6 million. Now, here to share more details about this street improvement and water main replacement project is Lincoln Transportation Utilities Director, Assistant Director of Transportation, Thomas Schaefer. Thomas, thanks so much for all of your work on this.
Thank you, Mayor. The Lincoln on the Move 17th Street Improvement Project and associated water main project are perfect examples of how our team plans and coordinates projects to reduce construction impacts while improving city infrastructure. By coordinating these two projects together, we were able to reduce the construction time in this area by 6 months. The street improvements are complete, and the orange cones of progress will be picked up later this week once the final project items are completed. The 17th Street project stretches from A to S Streets, and the $3 million project is one of 6 Lincoln on the Move quarter-cent sales tax funded street projects that we are constructing this year. These 6 projects represent nearly $18 million of investment that is improving nearly 36 lane miles of streets spread out all across the 4 quadrants of our city. For this project, we improved 4.8 lane miles of road by fixing the base of the street to make it safer, sealing the cracks, and adding a new surface for a smoother drive. We also adjusted the public utilities, added new pavement markings, replaced several curbs and ramps, and improved the accessibility in the neighborhood. A buffered bike lane was added to the east side of 17th Street from A to R streets. This effort will enhance the safety for bicyclists by providing a designated space for them to travel. It'll do improved connectivity between the neighborhoods, businesses, UNL campus, and the nearby bike paths, and support multiple transportation modes and the community's bike plan. Buses will now use the bike lane to pick up and drop off passengers to minimally impact vehicle traffic. Our team moved the existing parking from the east side to the west side of the street between B and G streets. Metered parking remains on the west side of the street between O and S. These changes maintain parking in the area while enhancing that transit access. From above the street to now below it, crews replace water mains along 17th Street from A to H, K to O, and also portions of B, C, and E streets. This $3.1 million project improved infrastructure and will help increase the water pressure for the neighborhood and decrease our community's maintenance costs in the area. As we celebrate the reopening of 17th Street this week and make the final traffic signal updates to increase traffic flow, we lift up another successful street improvement that was made possible by our community's backing of the Lincoln on the Move funding. Thank you.
City officials invited Kathy Wilkin, a resident of the Near South neighborhood and the association secretary, and Brody Weber, city council member, to share feedback as to how the 17th Street Corridor Improvement Project will impact residents in the area.
Hi, I'm Kathy Wilkin, and a longtime resident of the Near South neighborhood located in central Lincoln. I love this part of the city. I can't begin to tell you how excited I am to see the 17th Street transformed. And to know we have a new water main infrastructure under the street is an additional win-win for us. I'm excited about increased water pressure, a little bit more in the shower. Thank you. This street improvement isn't about just a smoother and safer street, although it certainly is. It is about connection. Whether we're walking our kids to school, biking to our parks, and we have this great new bike lane I'm so excited about, or simply driving to the grocery store, this upgrade makes our life easier, safer, and much more enjoyable. It sure is for me. This is where I drive to work every day. Goodbye, potholes. To me, this beautiful improvement sends a message that the Near South and the surrounding neighborhoods really do matter. When we see projects like this, we know our city leaders are listening to us and taking action to improve our quality of life, one street at a time. So on behalf of myself and my many residents and friends here in the Near South neighborhood, thank you, Mayor. Thank you to the City of Lincoln, the Lincoln Transportation and Utilities, and especially the city workers who transformed 17th Street no matter the weather conditions. I watch them every day. Talk about hard work. This street has been under construction for a while, but the long-term value is already showing. I appreciate it every day, and so do my tires. Thank you, Lincoln.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate your words. And you mentioned local leaders listening, and we have one of them right here with us. Lincoln City Council members play a really important role in supporting investment in our streets. Councilman Brody Weber has made them a top priority, and part of this street project is in his district. We wanted to invite him to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor, for having me on this beautiful day to talk about roads. Always a good day to do so. I also want to extend my sincere thanks to all of the individuals, the city staff, the engineers, the contractors, and the community leaders whose hard work made the 17th Street Lincoln on the Move project a success. As a member of the Lincoln City Council, I'm committed to building and maintaining a street network that not only keeps people moving, but also strengthens our neighborhoods, supports our local businesses, and improves our quality of life. That's exactly what Lincoln on the Move has accomplished, and thanks to the continued support of Lincoln voters, it's exactly what we'll continue to do, delivering for years to come. The 17th Street project is a shining example of that success. It improves mobility, it enhances safety, and it opens new doors of opportunity for residents, businesses, and visitors alike. I'm especially proud to be here today because a large portion of this project runs through the Northwest District that I am so honored to represent every day. It's exciting for me personally to think about the UNL students who will now enjoy a smoother and safer commute to campus. The same commute that I made not so long ago as a student, but I'll let you decide exactly how long ago. It's been a while, but it's something that I really appreciate knowing that those students will have. This project is part of a broader citywide story. It's one where we've invested in both established neighborhoods and new growth areas, from our downtown to all of the corners of the city of Lincoln. Projects like this remind me what's possible when a community comes together with a shared vision and a commitment to progress. So thank you, Lincoln, for believing in better streets, the streets that we know that we deserve, and for investing in our shared future, and for continuing to show what we can achieve together when we move forward together. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilmember. I share your gratitude and once again want to offer my thanks to our community members for supporting Lincoln on the Move. Through this initiative, we are making streets and our quality of life better in Lincoln. With that, we would be happy to take any questions from the media. Any questions? Okay, great. Thank you again for joining us on this beautiful sunny morning in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we have safer, smoother streets running all across our city. Thank you.
With the 17th Street Corridor Improvement Project completed, Lincoln Transportation and Utilities is turning their attention to their next planned project. More information on Lincoln on the Move and the 17th Street Corridor Improvement Project can be found at lincoln.ne.gov. Following a full day of negotiations, President Donald Trump's self-named Big Beautiful Bill passed out of Congress in a 218 to 214 vote and is now on its way to President Trump's desk to be signed into law, possibly as soon as July 4th. The bill, which President Trump has touted as integral to his second-term agenda, touches on nearly every aspect of the American economy, from social safety nets to income taxes. But today, we are just focusing on one aspect: Medicaid. The bill makes significant cuts to Medicaid, and it is estimated that its passage will leave nearly 12 million Americans uninsured. That's the broad picture. Joining us to bring some clarity as to the effect on Nebraskans specifically is Sarah Marash, the Healthcare Access Program Director from Nebraska Appleseed. So obviously, 12 million is a huge number. Can you tell us what access to healthcare is going to look like for those 12 million folks who are facing the possibility of being uninsured moving forward?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is, I guess, how many Nebraskans have Medicaid coverage right now. So Medicaid is a critical, important program, not only supports the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of Nebraskans, and for folks, that's 340,000 Nebraskans currently rely on Medicaid. But Medicaid is also critical to our health systems in general. It provides critical funding for hospitals. So we know that in Nebraska specifically, on the Medicaid side alone, and there's more complicated provisions in there that also impact other forms of healthcare that maybe we can talk about too, but they're estimating that in Nebraska, up to 55,000 people will lose coverage, will lose Medicaid coverage specifically. And so those 55,000 people aren't going to lose the need to go to the doctor. And our hospitals are going to take a hit because they are still going to need to treat those 55,000 people, but they won't be able to receive, federal funding to cover their costs for that. So for those folks, we're going to see people not being able to go to the doctor when they have a toothache or the dentist when they have a toothache. They may present in the emergency room with an abscess because, they weren't able to get preventative care and treatment for that. We'll see people, miss preventative care screenings, and, the ripple effects of just not being able to go to the doctor when you have a bad cough or are sick. There's are really critical aspects of treatment that impact the whole community. And even though, Medicaid, I think, is kind of the big headline of this bill because it severely undercuts our healthcare system and will have tens of thousands of Nebraskans alone who lose their healthcare coverage. Our health system will suffer so much that no one is going to be untouched by this bill from the healthcare perspective. So we're going to see a lot of different impacts down the line for everyone, every healthcare consumer, which is all of us.
A lot to unpack there because there's a lot to unpack in this bill in general. So we're just going to start real simple. Obviously, here in Lincoln, that is already a huge net of impact that we're going to be seeing for folks seeking healthcare. Can you tell us more about what that looks like for urban versus rural, though, and what those differences of Nope, English just stopped working in my brain, but you know what I mean.
Different access, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, one key piece of this is rural hospitals in particular already struggle and are already, operating in the red in a lot of circumstances. And Nebraska, is no different. We have rural hospitals that are amazing across our state, but they rely on Medicaid funding to stay open and to keep their doors open. And so we are expecting our state to lose anywhere from $3 to $5 billion dollars in the 10-year period that this bill is going to take effect. And so we're going to just see this huge suck of resources come out of these hospitals. And so in urban areas, there are more people to visit, that need these facilities, that need these hospitals with more diverse funding sources. And in rural areas, we know the rural hospitals already struggle to, keep their finances afloat. We've been warned recently too that if the bill passed, that it was likely that 6 hospitals could close in rural areas when this bill takes full effect. So 2 years after this bill takes full effect. And so in those circumstances, think about a mom who's pregnant and needs to travel to prenatal care. If her local hospital closes, that's a 10-minute drive. She may be driving an hour to her prenatal appointments. She, may have to drive an hour or more to deliver her baby, which can, if there's, a severe situation, can be really dangerous and costly for the individuals and their health involved. You can also think about people going through cancer treatments. If they have to travel so far, it will be more of a strain for them to have to take off work as well. And then, of course, like your emergent care situations where someone has a heart attack or there's a car accident, having to go further and further out because we're just missing these facilities in rural areas. And so I think in the rural areas in particular, be on the lookout for closures. I know I think it was today or yesterday, the Curtis Medical Center, I believe, announced that they were closing, and they noted in part it was because of the anticipated federal Medicaid financing uncertainties. And so we know that they play such a critical role in these rural areas. And because people have less options in rural areas, it's not like a Lincoln where there's multiple hospitals you can go to or multiple clinics. A lot of times that is the one clinic or hospital or doctor that's close. And so I think we can expect everyone to be impacted. That's regardless of whether you have Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance. Those closures will impact everyone and hurt everyone's healthcare and health outcomes.
That was not an insignificant amount of money that you mentioned there earlier. In 6 hospitals, of course, no one wants to see 6 hospitals in rural areas shut down. So I guess I'm wondering, what options do these hospitals have, if any, to kind of offset these cuts to their funding?
That's a great question. I think one thing that we've heard is hospitals and other providers warning that they may have to increase costs on privately insured folks or folks who are paying out of pocket for care. So there's going to be that big gap where people are still going to be using care. There will be likely an increase in uncompensated care, which just means that when someone goes to the hospital has to treat those folks, and folks aren't able to pay. And then the hospital essentially kind of eats those costs as uncompensated care. And so to cover up for that uncompensated care, they may raise the cost of other services for those who are privately insured, which could get passed along from the insurance companies to those with private insurance. So that's been warned too that we will all see, regardless of what form of insurance you have or in coverage you have, rising costs. And then, of course, too, hospitals could also close services. So we know OB services in particular and birthing services and labor and delivery are particularly expensive for hospitals to have. And so oftentimes those are, cost saving measures. People cut those sorts of services. There's also other, surgical or other services within the hospital that they could limit and cut as well, which, even if a hospital isn't closing, if those wings of the hospitals close or they're not able to provide those services anymore, we're going to see access issues. We'll see employment issues too, because hospitals are often really large employers, especially in rural areas.
I'm glad you mentioned employment issues. That it was something I wasn't even thinking about in terms yet. I would have gotten there eventually. But for employment, like, do you have any idea how many folks are employed in the healthcare system in Nebraska? Do you have numbers like that, or do we have an idea of what that number is going to look like?
Yeah, so I know there are, I think it's in the thousands of people who are employed with the healthcare industry in Nebraska. In rural areas, I don't have those numbers specifically. I think one challenge in particular with this bill and estimating the potential impacts is it's been changing so quickly that estimates that we knew about at the beginning of May now are different about how many are expected to actually lose jobs as a result of this bill. But I do know that there are predictions out there that there will be like hundreds of Nebraskans within the healthcare sector that will lose their jobs because of the impacts of the cuts in these bills.
And so, of course, obviously, we've talked a little bit about potential solutions that hospitals might be turning to compensate for these cuts. How maintainable are those solutions, though, do you think?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this bill is that it really passes costs along to everyday Nebraskans and consumers, and that's who it's hurting. And so I think, the sustainability of it is really challenging to estimate. I know hospitals, and I know the hospital folks would be the best folks to speak on this, but I know I've heard them talk in the past about how difficult it already is to collect because healthcare costs are so challenging for families to afford. Medical debt is a serious crisis in Nebraska. So when we're thinking about hospitals and providers having to increase costs and insurers having to increase their costs and passing those along to consumers, the sustainability of the model isn't a great isn't a great not too it doesn't look too rosy, I guess. And I think what we'll see is it really hitting the family pocketbooks. And so when we're thinking about this bill in a wider perspective, what we're seeing is this bill really took from the most vulnerable Nebraskans and everyday Nebraskans, and really is primarily to fund tax breaks for billionaires. And so we're seeing this kind of reverse Robin Hood where we're taking from, the poor and the most vulnerable and giving to the most wealthy. And I think that is really disturbing. But I think that's part of the wider question, right? About what Nebraskans want to prioritize. And we think Nebraskans and the Nebraskans we work with really value their health and well-being. And cost is a huge barrier already to that. And so with this magnitude of cuts and this magnitude of coverage losses and threats to our vulnerable hospital systems, it's not a sustainable model, and it's going to hurt significantly healthcare access for us all and everyone's, pocketbooks.
So I wasn't aware that cost was already one of such a high barrier for Nebraskans. You mentioned that medical debt is prevalent in our communities. Can you expand a little more on that, on what those current rates look like?
Yeah, so I think for medical debt, I believe it's about 10% of Nebraskans roughly that have medical debt. And I think one of the things that's challenging for medical debt in particular is once you have it, it's hard to get out of it. And so, one thing with our fragmented healthcare system in the US is that we have healthcare coverage options, but they're very segmented, right? So some people have employer-based coverage, some people have Medicare, Medicaid, Marketplace, or TRICARE, or insurance or healthcare coverage through VA or Veterans Affairs. And so there's so many moments in our lives, though, where there are gaps in coverage. And so we know typically the best way to be able to afford healthcare and access healthcare is to have insurance. But there are so many instances in our life progression just naturally where a lot of times there are gaps in coverage. And so those at those times, people are most vulnerable to rack up those really large bills and medical debts. And what we've seen too, kind of in the last couple decades, is a lot more private insurance costs being passed on to employers, which is passed on then to employees. And so when we're looking at, just everyday Nebraskans, they have very large deductibles and copays that are challenging. So even folks who have insurance, even if there's not a gap in coverage, it can be incredibly expensive just to afford basic necessities or like life events, like having a baby. Having a baby in the NICU puts people in medical debt.
And of course, we know that all of these cuts have come before they even have started putting together a budget for the next couple of years. So we still have some questions about how this might turn out. But do you have any comments you'd like to make about these cuts to Medicaid or its potential impact on Nebraskans?
Yeah, I think particularly, I think the state, unfortunately, is going to be put in a really difficult position. So we know in the past year it played out where we already have a really tight pocketbook at the state and not a lot of extra funds or any extra funds, I think folks would say, to absorb these cuts and these costs. And I think you mentioned at the top of our discussion that Medicaid cuts aren't the only thing that are in this bill. So there's also threats to, things like food security. So hundreds of thousands of Nebraskans could potentially lose their food access. And our state isn't going to be able to absorb all of the costs. And our state is going to have to make some really difficult decisions. And I heard someone share this a couple of months ago, but really the states are now going to be left with the decision of who they're going to have to throw off the lifeboat. And that's just a horrible situation for states to be in. And that's our reality, though. And so I think looking forward, our state really, we need everyone to engage in our state legislative process, starting now, starting for the next couple years, and beyond, to let our state leadership know that we need healthcare, we need food, and we need Nebraskans supported. And that's true for everyone because it has ripple effects, regardless of whether folks have Medicaid coverage now or food supports now. These programs and these cuts and the magnitude of these cuts impact us all. And so these are critical programs that need investments, and we cannot let these cuts impact Nebraskans the way they're predicted. And the state does have the ability to take action to protect Nebraskans and do the right thing to make sure people can go to the doctor when they're sick and eat and, put food on the table for their kiddos.
Oop, muted myself by accident there. Yeah, with those commentaries, it's hard to tell where the future is going to end up in the next couple of years, but we appreciate you joining us to help give us some more insight, hopefully, into what we can expect.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
We are going to take our mid-hour break. When we return, we'll be hearing from local health and policy leaders as they try to navigate the impacts of the bill on Nebraska communities. We'll be right back.
Support for KZUM comes from Lincoln Pharmacy, a local neighborhood pharmacy located at 33rd and A Streets, offering medication therapy management, adherence packaging, medical supplies, prescription delivery, COVID and flu vaccines, and more. Open Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Saturdays from 10 till 4. More information is available at lincoln-rx.com.
And from support for KZUM comes from the Zoo Bar, celebrating 52 years with Zoo Fest 2025, happening Friday, July 11th and Saturday, July 12th in downtown Lincoln, with headliners Carolyn Wonderland, Kelly Hunt, Blood Brothers with Mike Zito and Albert Castiglia, and Tommy Castro and the Painkillers. Full festival lineup is online at zoobar.com/zoofest. Tickets are available at the Zoo Bar and on ticketweb.com.
Your Malone Community Center continues to be a cornerstone of cultural, educational, and social programming. The center is home to an out-of-school program. The lead agency for 2 community learning centers hosts a weekly food distribution service along with other programs. For more information on the Malone Community Center, please contact our office at 402-474-1110 or go to our website www.malonecenter.org. Celebrating the heritage of service since 1955, Your Malone Community Center.
And welcome back to today's episode of KZUM News. My name is Samantha Dickman, and I am your host for this afternoon. Following a full day of negotiations, President Donald Trump's self-named Big Beautiful Bill passed out of Congress in a 218 to 214 vote and is now on its way to President Trump's desk to be signed into law, possibly as soon as July 4th. The bill, which President Trump has touted as integral to his second-term agenda, touches on nearly every aspect of the American economy, from social safety nets to income taxes. But today, we are focusing on just one aspect: Medicaid. The bill makes significant cuts to Medicaid, and it is estimated that its passage will leave nearly 12 million Americans uninsured. That's the broad picture. Today, we're trying to clarify what those cuts will look like for Nebraskans. Before the break, Sarah Maresh, the Healthcare Access Program Director from Nebraska Appleseed, joined us to discuss healthcare accessibility. And now we have Dr. Jed Hansen, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Rural Health Association, joining us to provide insight on how it will affect rural hospitals all across Nebraska. What are your primary concerns now that this bill has passed?
Yeah, thanks, Samantha, for asking that question and for having me on. We've maintained all along that Medicaid isn't just a program or just a funding source for the poorest among us. Medicaid for our rural hospitals is a significant source of funding. It's what helps stabilize our rural hospitals, our rural clinics, and our rural communities. And these deep cuts to Medicaid are really troubling for us. Some of the really big impact numbers, we think we could see as many as 38,000 rural Nebraskans lose coverage over the next decade. We're seeing, the calculated number for the state is going to be about $3.6 billion over 10 years that our hospitals will lose out on. And what that will mean is fewer services and possibly even closure of some hospitals or clinics.
So I know you've mentioned closures there, and we've heard of at least one hospital that's already announcing a closure. And I spoke to Sarah from Nebraska Appleseed earlier, and she said there's five more at least that is a genuine concern for. Do you think that we might be looking at more than just those six, though?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's something that we track very closely on our end, and in any given year, about half of our state's 62 critical access hospitals will operate in a negative margin. We really become concerned when they have 3 years in a row of a negative operating margin, and we have six of those facilities in the state right now. There are three that we're especially worried about, and then another three that, boy, if the wind blows in the wrong direction, we could see some challenging days ahead of us. Um, but it's not just closures, or what would likely happen for these facilities is conversion over to that rural emergency hospital model, where they lose some of the essential services like inpatient swing beds. So, if grandma or grandpa, if they're recovering, can go into kind of a lower, not a lower care, but a lower cost of care in the hospitals. And there's those would be some of those services that those communities would lose. We've also been tracking pretty closely with maternal care, and of our 62 critical access hospitals, 27 are delivering babies, and we think that there are three that are in a very critical state that will likely be affected by the big beautiful bill. And the honest answer is that as many of 20 of those 27 facilities are likely going to feel some significant effects with regards to birthing services, and we just don't know where that will line up.
And so I guess for folks, so that they kind of have a reference point, what does healthcare access already look like for folks in those rural areas? And since we know what it could look like.
Yeah, Nebraska has been generally blessed with relatively stable rural health care. There are certainly challenges, and we have a lot of really good leaders across the state that are working to make sure that not only those essential services like primary care, emergency services, and EMS are available in most communities, but as we've been talking about with things like maternal care, about half of our hospitals are working very diligently with those hospital care provider teams to making for those services to be in place. But there are realities of rural life and of rural healthcare, and probably the most often cited one is just going to be transportation. And for some folks, that's just a tough thing. It can be tough in a metro area, but when you start stacking on a lot of miles, it can be really challenging. In the case of Curtis, Nebraska, which you had referenced, that clinic is closing, and that community hospital in McCook, who runs that clinic, they've stated that the closure is in part due to the Medicaid instability created by the big beautiful bill. That's extra miles, and it's one thing to be able to drive in the spring or in the summer, but in the middle of winter, January and February, some of those local highways, given the right conditions, can be really tough to navigate, especially if you're someone that's older and living in a community like Curtis.
And I mean, that loss of access paints a very grim picture, to put it bluntly. So I suppose I'm wondering, what solutions do communities have in this case to help keep those rural hospitals open and functioning, and making sure that they're not losing that access?
Yeah, I mean, like most local businesses, making sure that you're supporting your local clinic or hospital goes an awful long way. But also, we're recommending, even though the bill has passed, to continue to let your congressional members know how important it is to have healthcare in your community. And Curtis is a great example of what Medicaid is and what it isn't. Yes, it's an insurance program for some of the poorest in our community, but when Medicaid becomes not stable. And when you lose healthcare, you lose healthcare for everyone. And so these cuts to Medicaid aren't just insurance losses for the potentially 38,000 Nebraskans. In some cases, and certainly in Curtis, it's a loss of healthcare for everyone.
Now, of course, I saw you speak at the Stronger Today or United Today, Stronger Tomorrow's press conference on June 27th, and you had mentioned that there is talk of a rural hospital relief fund presently. What information do we have about the possibility of that fund?
Yeah. So, and I would like to say that, well, we're strongly opposed to the big beautiful bill and these cuts to Medicaid. We do understand that Congress is trying to balance a lot of things, and that we do feel like the hospital relief fund, which now stands at $50 billion over 5 years, is a good faith effort to try to find some immediate stabilization. Our concern is the long-term stability of rural health, but there is that fund available. It'll be divvied up in allotments of $10 billion. And boy, some of these are just giant numbers, or they sound giant. But in a case like Nebraska, we believe that over that 5-year period, our state alone is going to need about $1 billion in additional help, and we're going to do everything we can to fight to get our portion of that out of that 50 billion. But there's no guarantee for any one state or any one hospital to actually be able to receive those funds. And so we're concerned that just where those funds will go and if we're going to be able to utilize them in an effective way in Nebraska. But certainly it's a good faith effort. In talking with our congressional teams over the last couple of weeks, we know that they are concerned about our rural facilities, and I'd like to think that they were working with this as part of the solution in mind. But at the end of the day, this bill is creating a lot of concern, and we're going to have to ask Congress to go back and get back to work for Nebraskans to find other funding and to find other programs to make sure that our rural communities are safe and that they have health care.
And as you've mentioned, that would be a stopgap measure in a lot of ways to help counteract these current cuts. What do you think about the sustainability of it as a stopgap measure? Do you think that would be something that would work in the short term, but in the long term, you might still see negative effects on population migration out of rural communities and stuff like that as a result of these cuts?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And yeah, I mean it's a 5-year fund, so there will be some relative stability over the next 5 years. A lot of these provisions in the big beautiful bill related to Medicaid, some of the coverage components don't take effect until 2027, so right after the next midterm election. And so we'll want to make sure that folks are certainly aware of that. And then I'm just kind of doing a quick browse of my notes. But some of these other programs, they'll begin phasing in 2028, and then we'll have a phasing down period. Something called the state provider tax, which is the one that we're most concerned about. That'll have a phase down approach beginning in 28 and ending in 2032. So there is still some time for Congress to act and for them to come up with a better plan. If they're not able to do so, that rural hospital stability fund, and then when that runs out, along with as these provisions start to really take hold, we can expect to see a lot of bad headlines.
Mm-hmm. And so, of course, we've talked about some potential solutions for folks to help support their local community hospitals, and that's whether you're in a rural area or an urban area. But do you have any other suggestions for folks who are kind of looking at how to move forward with this?
Yeah. I mean, it's and you were asking about hospitals and about the effect and what that'll have on the community. And I apologize. I was providing a lot of numbers there, but hospitals are a cornerstone to every community, especially across greater Nebraska. That hospital, that clinic, that school. Those are what makes a community, along with the small businesses and the farmers and ranchers. And when one of those goes away, it's a big deal, and there'll be a lot of concern that we'll see some out migration. And so, fast forwarding to your question now, and what can they do? Um, you look to your neighbor to the left, look to your neighbor to the right, and we're going to have to look for solutions, and many of those may be at the community level. We still have a number of county hospitals in the state, so there will be some ability at the local level to look at funding and to look at how you can support healthcare. Um, Looking at some of those hospital foundations, looking at some other philanthropic organizations. The Nebraska Community Foundation is out there. And what can communities do to rally around their hospital where they're not having to rely on DC to do so?
Perfect. And of course, I don't have any other questions for you today, Dr. Hanson, but do you have anything last minute you'd like to add for folks so that they might not know about either the Medicaid cuts or potential impacts on those rural communities?
Yeah, we're still out here fighting. We're working closely with a lot of other organizations and associations like the Nebraska Hospital Association. So there's going to be a lot of bad headlines, and there's a reason for those bad headlines. But we're out here, we're fighting, and we're trying to make sure that we can keep healthcare local across the state.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Dr. Hanson, to give us some more insight on what we can expect in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Even before the bill passed, health and policy leaders across Nebraska have been communicating these potential impacts to communities all across the state. These leaders partnered with United Today, Stronger Tomorrow, an organization dedicated to community building in the Upper Mid and Mountain West, to hold a virtual press conference prior to the Senate and Congress votes on Friday, June 27th. At the press conference, healthcare workers shared their concerns regarding Medicaid cuts. Tyler Sherman, an APRN with Webster County Community Hospital, noted that his workplace might face a shortage in resources.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us with this press conference. As I was introduced, I'm Tyler Sherman, an APRN at Webster County Hospital in Red Cloud, Nebraska, 7 miles from the Kansas border. We have a population of 1,000 people. Medicaid is a major component in all rural hospitals with their budgets, with a majority of those rural hospitals already working at a revenue loss. Medicaid helps bridge that revenue, so we're a little bit work more at an even budget. If Medicaid is cut, we're going to have to look at other revenue forms of revenue, possibly raising the cost of private insurance patients, forcing them to pay more out of pocket for our services. With the Medicaid cut, these rural hospitals that are already working at a loss likely will be closed within 24 months of the shutdown for the Medicaid funding. And with the closure of the rural hospitals, patients are going to need to travel further for their care. For us, the next big hospital would be Mary Lanning and Hastings. That's 40 miles away from us. This includes life-saving services. So if you call the 911 with a heart attack, it's going to be 45 minutes to 50 minutes before you get to the nearest hospital that's open, versus 5 minutes with Webster County Hospital and other rural hospitals being open. The rural economic growth right now for Red Cloud is positive. We're expanding our services here at the hospital, just not only at the hospital, but also in the town. And that's a good proponent of that is with the hospital and school. I think those are the two pillars for rural economic health. If you lose one of those pillars, the economic is likely going to plateau and then very rapidly decrease, because those are probably your highest two employers in the county. and that's going to reduce the tax revenue for the county, and the community and counties are going to struggle from that standpoint with the Medicaid cuts.
At the June 27th press conference hosted by United Today, Stronger Tomorrow, policy leaders also highlighted the fact that folks with disabilities have the potential to be disproportionately impacted by the cuts to Medicaid. Edison McDonald, Executive Director of National Disability Action, and Alana Shriver, Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of Service Providers, talk more about this from both the access and the provider side of the equation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. Next, I'll welcome Edison McDonald. He is the Executive Director of National Disability Action.
Hi. Hi, my name is Edison McDonald. I'm the Executive Director for National Disability Action, and glad to be here. Today, I want to talk about really kind of the problems with work requirements. National Disability Action is a nonpartisan organization that defends disability rights through education, advocacy, and when necessary, by organizing and voting out those who don't listen. I came to this work as an employer of people with disabilities who was frustrated by the red tape around hiring hardworking, dedicated people with disabilities, and have since worked with thousands of individuals, families, and employers navigating our already complex Medicaid system. I've read every word of the so-called big, beautiful bill, at least the House version, still working on the Senate version. And while there's an effort to protect people with disabilities, the work requirements in Section 44-141 are deeply flawed and will not protect them or many others in need. I know Congress members like Bacon and Flood think it does cover them. However, it doesn't, and here's why. Disability definitions vary by state, and many people with real, serious conditions don't qualify for exemptions that are expected in this legislation. 2, this will cut people who work informal or gig jobs like mowing lawns or doing odd jobs for their neighbors who can't provide the documentation required even if they're working above 80 hours. Others can only safely work maybe 50 to 60 hours a month due to their disability, and they'd be cutting off for doing their best. In rural communities and for seasonal jobs, meeting rigid hour requirements isn't realistic, and new limits could force people out of care for working too much. Let's be clear, this isn't about fraud, it's paperwork and system failure that's already causing people to lose coverage. I know I have seen Nebraska DHHS staff constantly miss emails, miss a page on a 60-page attachment, get things mailed too late to arrive by a deadline, incorrectly interpret something, and a number of other possibilities where it ends up being that we see somebody lose Medicaid not because of what they have done, how much worked or not worked, but because Medicaid screwed it up, and this doubles the chances of that happening. But one of the most absurd parts of this bill is how it turns the familiar benefits cliff into a benefits sandwich trap. Instead of just a hard cutoff at the top, now workers could be stuck between a minimum work requirement of 80 hours and an income ceiling tied to Medicaid eligibility. Depending on your wage, state rules, and household size, that means you could lose benefits by working too little or too much. Imagine needing to work at least 80 hours to keep coverage. But if you work 83 hours, you would go over the income cap and lose essential care. For employers, that makes filling a standard 8-hour shift a nightmare. This type of scenario could be life-threatening for families with high medical costs who fall outside of Nebraska's already narrow disability definitions. Work support should help people thrive, not punish them for how they work. This poorly designed bill hurts Nebraskans, and we need to stop this big, bad bill. Now to speak more about what this means on the provider side, Elena Shriver.
Hi, I'm Elena Shriver. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Association of Service Providers. We're the statewide association for organizations who support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in their homes and communities. We support about 15,000 Nebraskans on what's called 1915C waivers. So it's a Medicaid waiver program. 99% of our funding comes from Medicaid. Essentially, what these Medicaid cuts would mean for us is that we cease to exist. So Nebraska would have to potentially revert back to an institutional model, which isn't what families want for their loved ones, and it also costs 4 times as much as serving those individuals in their homes and communities where they want to live and be productive. What we do helps people with disabilities find jobs in their communities, as well as allows their family caregivers to go back to work and contribute to our economy. We're already short of workers in Nebraska, so we help make sure those people who want to work can work regardless of ability. We echo what Abby from the Nursing Association mentioned about short staffing and how that leads to burnout as well as safety issues. When we do our jobs well, we cut down on ER visits, APS calls, CPS calls, interactions with law enforcement, all kinds of things. It's those families who can't go to work because they have to stay home with someone with a disability, often rely on SNAP, Title 20, Medicaid. We help alleviate those also state-funded programs and reduce their costs. So the Congress people I've spoken with pay lip service to protecting Medicaid for people with disabilities, but in my experience, they're only thinking of that healthcare access, that visit to the doctor's office. They aren't realizing that our home and community-based services are a separate Medicaid waiver program that needs prescriptive language to protect them as well. And in addition to supporting 15,000 people with disabilities, we also employ thousands more. Sometimes our providers are one of the bigger employers in rural areas as well. We don't have a geographical center, a racial center, a socioeconomic center. We are absolutely nonpartisan services. Every single community in Nebraska has people with disabilities in need of our services. So with that, I'll hand things over to Phil, who is a board member with the ARC of Nebraska.
We are fast approaching the end of the hour, so here are your reminders for today. The KZUM Newsroom is always open to hearing about any questions, concerns, suggestions, or even any story ideas that you might want to share with us. All you have to do is give us a call at 402-474-5086, extension line 6. If you give us a call and we aren't available, don't forget to leave a voicemail. Or, if you aren't much of a phone person, you can also find our social media handles and more newsroom information at kzum.org under that About tab. Speaking of our website, if you happen to miss a show, you can always head to the KZUM News tab, where we archive all of our shows and include a transcript with links to that day's content. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out to Jack Rodenberg of the Rodenberg Music Experience. He put together all of the amazing original music that our news program uses. So once again, thank you, Jack. That wraps up our reminders for now. As you head out into the world, I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time. You just finished listening to KZUM News, an original production of KZUM Radio that airs every Saturday at 11 a.m. Coming up next is Beta Radio, so stay tuned.